Cimoooooooo. What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you the winners and losers of the September 2020 ban list. This is always a fun video to do after we get a ban list to kind of take a step back, breathe a little bit after all the hype, and really analyze what we're going to be looking at for the next several months. Remember, we're not getting the next ban list till like December 15th, I believe. So that's 3 whole months under this format. And yeah, you know, coronavirus and all that. So there's not really like real Yu-Gi-Oh going on anyway, but it's still fun to go ahead and take a look at what came out on top, so that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's go ahead and start with the winners, and just think about all of the top tier strategies from last format that came out of this ban list completely unscathed. I'm talking about Dragon Link, Eldritch, Dogmatica, Infernoble Knight. I mean, if you think about it, all of these decks pretty much had no hits, aside from like maybe some of the stuff that was hit because of Halkyfibrax, but even that's negligible because some of these decks don't necessarily rely on that, or there's adequate substitutes that they can continue playing that it really doesn't matter. Those cards just made it a little bit easier for them to play, but these decks are most likely going to continue to be top tier. I mean, it's really absurd to think about. And yeah, some of these decks are relatively new contextually, so I think it'd be a little bit shocking if Konami hit them right out of the gate, but we're going to start to see more and more of these strategies as the format progresses. Next up, Burning Abyss is a huge winner on the 2020 September Forbidden and Limited list. I mean, it got Graph and Seer back at 2 and Tour Guide at 3, not to mention it got Rusty Bardish back as well for any sort of PK Fire variants. I'm a little bit terrified of this deck. Like, Burning Abyss could actually be a potential contender here, and especially when we get Phantom Rage about a month from now. I mean, who knows where the format's going to be, but Burning Abyss, I mean, that has to be one of the best winners from this list. Remember, Burning Abyss is capable of some incredibly powerful and borderline degenerate things, as we've seen in the past. It's kind of amalgamized into more of like this heavy combo deck, but even if it still wants to play a little bit of a slower game, it can still end on a multiple negate board now thanks to Rusty and also Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. So how can you really argue that this deck doesn't stand a chance? Even if it's at like the rogue levels or the tier 2 levels, there is still a very good chance that Burning Abyss will see a ton of play. Now, we already mentioned Rusty Bardish, and honestly, Phantom Knights are a huge winner here as well. Now, it was a little bit telegraphed. Obviously, Konami does use the Forbidden and Limited list as a tool to help sell future products. So how would you incentivize people to want to go back into Phantom Knights than to release the best Phantom Knight card that they've ever printed? So seems to make sense, but indirectly, this also supports another archetype being Orcust. Orcust definitely fell out of favor in the last format just because it really wasn't able to keep up with some of the other top tier decks because they were just far and wide able to outclass it on basically every axis. But now that we've hit some of the more problematic cards in the format, and now that we have a card like Rusty Bardish back, maybe this is an opportunity for Orcust to actually go up a peg or two, and that way it will be able to stand a chance against some of the other top tier contenders. You guys have to remember, it wasn't too long ago that Orcust was the strongest deck of the format, and to be fair, the format was a lot slower back then, so when you compare it to some of these other crazy combo decks that we're dealing with now, it may not be an apples to apples comparison. However, there is definitely a chance for Orcust to come back. It will most likely be on the back of Rusty Bardish and Red Eye's Dark Dragoon. Another pair of decks that both benefit from the new ban list are both ABC and any sort of Paleozoic Frog variant. Remember when Master Rule 5 first came around and they auto-limited both ABC Dragon Buster and Totally Awesome because they were afraid that those cards were just going to take over the format? Yeah, didn't happen, and now here we are having these cards moving to 2. Is this going to do anything? Most likely not. It makes these decks a little bit more viable, maybe have a slight chance of competing at the rogue level, but again, I don't think it's going to change too much, and I really wish they weren't so apprehensive with these types of unlimits because I really think we should just have both of these cards back at 3. Let people play full power ABC. Let them play full power Paleo Toad, whatever. I think that would just be a great way to really just inject a lot of life into the format and allow people to play a much more wider breadth of decks than might be currently available. Sky Striker is a decent winner here. It got back its 3rd copy of Widow Anchor. It's crazy how not too long ago we were complaining about Sky Striker, but you've got people like Ryan Yu who are still able to take first places left and right playing playing Sky Striker, and that was with Widow Anchor not at 3. So, you know, Sky Striker still hanging in there, and now that it has a third Widow Anchor is one of the strongest cards in that deck. Don't forget 3 Kagari as well, so who knows, Sky Striker might have a bit of a resurgence as well. And another strategy that people are incredibly happy to see back, or not depending on your personality, is Monarchs. Pantheism moving from 1 to 3 now brings Monarch to full power. That's kind of frightening. Again, Monarch used to be one of the strongest decks back in the day, and domain locking still could very well be a very viable strategy. Even at the budget level, Monarch could just see play because it is so incredibly cheap, because essentially it's one of those 3 structure deck decks that with a little bit of extra tech can basically be a deck that you can take to any single type of tournament, locals especially. I mean, again, there's no huge tournaments taking place, but yeah, the deck has its consistency issues, but that didn't stop it from being tier 1 back in its prime. Now, there's another deck I have in the winner's circle that I'm not sure if this is a good thing. Like, it's definitely a winner, but is this what we want for the game? I'm talking about Eva Gishki Gust Kraken going back to 3. That's frightening. I mean, this card enables just 4 to 5 card hand loops. Like, there's a reason this card has been on the limited list for as long as it has. And what's frightening is I'm pretty sure this is still just as viable now as it was back in the day. I've seen videos circulating of like a single Halkyfibrax ending in a 4 to 5 card hand loop, depending on certain circumstances. So like, yay? Like, is that good? Like, I guess if you're a sadistic fuck who really enjoys playing that style of deck and making their opponents cry at every available opportunity, then yeah, sure, it's wonderful for you. But in terms of like the overall health of the game, I'm not necessarily sure it's a winner, but I still figured I'd mention it because it's kind of cool to see a deck like this being able to actually thrive right now, but I don't know about this one, Konami. We're gonna have to see where this goes. And I suppose to wrap up the winners, Pendulum, like, they got Double Iris back. Like, is that good? Like, yeah, Double Iris is great, but like, I don't think it's going to propel Pendulum to like the tier 1 status or anything like that. Pendulum's still a pretty decent deck, but yeah, I think it's gonna need a little bit more than Double Iris to be able to go back to its former glory. And now we're gonna get to what you guys were really waiting for, the losers of the September 2020 ban list. First and foremost, this is the most obvious one, Adamancipator. Man, Adamancipator definitely had this coming. Block Dragon getting banned was definitely the correct hit. Funny enough, Megalith also is on the losers list as well, because that deck might have relied more on Block Dragon than Adamancipator. It's definitely debatable, and to be fair, I don't know enough about Megalith to really be able to say one way or another. I'm sure you guys will let me know down in the comments, but for any sort of rock-based deck, and with both Adamancipator and Megalith actually seeing just an absurd amount of play, and Adamancipator pretty much almost definitively being the best deck of the last several formats, I mean, it definitely had this coming. This card enabled so much unfair advantage by being able to generate a +3 both on your turn and your opponent's turn thanks to IP Masquerena, that even if your opponent did find a way to manage to break your seemingly unbreakable board, let's be honest, then you could just use that Block Dragon, refuel your hand with all your Adamancipator monsters, and do it again on the next turn, or just OTK, which is most likely what would happen. Now, is Adamancipator still playable without Block Dragon? I believe so, but I think the deck becomes much more of a glass cannon, because once you've expended all your resources on your end board, if your opponent is able to break it, which statistically the odds are not in their favor, but even if they did hypothetically, then you're going to be in a much worse position. You're not going to have your hand refueled from Block Dragon. You're not going to be able to combo off again, technically. So it's going to be a little bit more fair, but at that point, are you really going to want to play Adamancipator? There's other combo decks like Dragon Link or Infernoble Knight that have different varying pros and cons versus Adamancipator now, and Adamancipator without Block Dragon versus with Block Dragon is like a complete night and day scenario, so I'm not sure if it's going to withstand the test of time. Another pair of losers for this ban list are Jet Synchron and Mecha Phantom Beast O-Lion. How many tuners are going to have to die at the hands of Crystron Halkyfibrax? When is Konami going to learn that they cannot ban the cards around the problem and they need to hit the problem card directly? We've seen this with Firewall. We've seen this with so many other powerful cards in the past that eventually these cards are going to meet their fate. But again, Konami wants to let these cards be viable for somewhat of a period of time so people can get the chance to play with them. Then they'll ban them after they make their money. So it's really no surprise because cards like O-Line and Jet Synchron aren't really going to help the bottom line, right? So it's unfortunate that that's what we have to deal with. And yeah, these were two of the best enablers for Halkyfibrax, but there's still plenty of ways to work around it even without them. So I think players are going to adapt just fine. Another set of losers are actually the combo decks in general. Now you might be wondering where I'm going with this, but I'm talking about Called by the Grave getting limited. Now this is a little bit debatable because some combo decks weren't even playing Called by the Grave because their engine was so strong they were able to play through hand traps regardless of if they had Called by the Grave or not. But Called by the Grave was this card that typically combo decks would take advantage of to help ensure that their combos would go through despite any hand traps your opponent may have. So this is definitely a greater hit to combo decks than say control decks, because if control decks get stopped by a hand trap, they're not out of it, right? Like typically a hand trap can be a one and done for these types of combo decks, and then they're just a sitting duck because their combo didn't resolve. Where control decks, they might have some back row, they might have hand traps of their own, etc., etc. So when it comes to Called by the Grave, having this card get limited to one severely hinders combo decks' ability to go off unless their engine is so ridiculously strong on its own that it doesn't really need a card like Called by the Grave to function. The other side of this is when you consider the business implications is that this is probably telegraphing that we're going to be receiving Crossout Designator, which is basically Called by the Grave 2.0 at some point in the near future. I'm going to put my money on Maximum Gold. That's where I feel like it makes the most sense to release that card, but it kind of makes sense that if you have two cards that functionally do the same thing, you might as well limit the one that's already out and then make it so that, oh, you want to play 3 Called by the Grave again? Well, you can buy our new version in our new product. So it makes sense that that would be the case and would incentivize them to limit Called by the Grave. Additionally, some players are talking about that this was used to kind of boost the sales of Rise of the Duelist because of a card like Triple Tactical Talents. And yeah, that could arguably be true, but Rise of the Duelist has kind of been in circulation for a reasonable amount of time now. So like maybe it would bump up sales. If anything, it just kind of helps sales on the secondary market. So yeah, you could make the argument that if you limit Called by the Grave, people might want to flock to Triple Tactical Talents because that's like your second best option since we don't really have another Called by the Grave until it comes out. But again, it's not like a direct comparison to Called by the Grave because the cards don't do the exact same thing. But I guess if you're going to have a close second after Called by the Grave, then Triple Tactical Talents is probably your best pick. And for our last loser on the September 2020 ban list, we have none other than back row decks. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Harpy's Feather Duster is finally back. This card's been legal in the OCG for so long now, and yes, while it may be a main deck or side deck staple, I think it's a very healthy card for the game. Compared to a card like Heavy Storm, which blows up your own spells and traps, that is absolutely not okay with decks like True Draco and the like running around. Same thing goes for like Giant Trunade, because bouncing those cards back to your hand, we know how powerful those types of effects can be. So Harpy's Feather Duster, even though it seems like the most powerful of the three, it actually isn't. And with all these back row decks running around, like, you know, there are the Eldritches and all these other different types of, you know, slower control decks, it's a perfectly fine card. Solemn Judgment's at 3, so they've got plenty of ways to counter a Feather Duster anyway. So it's just really another card to add to your repertoire of back row removal, like Evenly Matched and Lightning Storm, that doesn't necessarily have the same conditions as those cards might. So having it as a one-of is pretty nice, and I don't think it's going to ruin the format. I think it's going to be just fine, but all you back row players out there are going to absolutely loathe when your opponent drops Duster on you. So guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your winners and losers from the September 2020 ban list. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member. Just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.